Okay, welcome to tutorial number 8. This time we'll be doing the more intermediate to advanced stuff. We'll be doing exclusively with the form, or if you're old school, it's called the sculpt modeling workspace. So firstly, let's start to understand what exactly form modeling is. So we're well aware of what solid body modeling is. If I go to create and I create a box, you don't have to follow me, I'm just showing. But I create a body, this here has now become a solid body, right? There are 6 faces, however many edges, I can't recall. And there's an internal geometry inside. With surfaces, there is no internal geometry, but there is the faces and the edges, right? It's a non-manifold. It's a manifold object, essentially, but has no volume. And with meshes, those are quite self-explanatory. It's just tessellations of surfaces that also do not have a body, but once you combine it can give you an internal geometry. So I'll delete this for now. So now let's look at forms, right? And first we'll go into the create form, which is up here on the solid workspace. There was a little icon. Now you can also find the form icon in the surface modeling, and that's because forms can also be used to create surfaces. So in this case, first let me just create a box so I can demonstrate some things to you. I'm going to select the right plane here, and I'm going to select the center, right? I can always hit the view cube to make it more centered. And what I'll do is I'll make this a 15 by 15 box. I'll hit left click, 15 by 15. Okay. And here it's going to ask me how far I want to extrude it. I'm just going to put a extrusion width of 12. And for now, I'll leave everything else default. It's fine, I just want to explain some stuff. So here you can see we have a shape. Now this, as it is right now, it's neither a solid nor a surface, it's a form. And so really what's happening is you have these edges here, and they're called T-splines. And what Fusion is doing is calculating sort of like a surface, if you want to think of it that way, between each of these points of vertices, the T-splines. And they're going to create a form based on that. And now the reason this is really useful in Fusion is you don't get to edit the actual vertices in the solid body form, but you can in the surface, but surfaces have their own disadvantages. So if I click edit form here, which is under the modify, and this would be your bread and butter when you're using form modeling, you can see I can select a few things. I can select either an edge, like so. I can select a face, or I can select the individual point itself where the edges meet. If you look at this here, you can see there are a few tools, and this may seem very daunting for beginners especially, but really this is very similar to the move command, except you have to remember now that all these edges are essentially connected to one another, and what you're moving is based on what you've selected. So in this case, if I select, let's just say the edge, watch as I move this upwards now. If I move the edge up, you can see how the rest of my body conforms to it. And you can see if I push it down, it's given me a divot, like so. So I'll hit Ctrl Z to revert it back. Again, I can also do different things, like I can rotate it, like so. I can give it a angle in towards the left, askew. Or I can also freely move it using the plane move, like so, right? Now, you might be wondering, what do these little things do? I find it's a little bit easier to explain with the face move, but for now I'll just show you. If I were to drag this down, you might not really understand what's happening here, that's fine. But if I do it this way, you can see that it's lengthening and shortening, right? So think of it as a vertically constrained or horizontally constrained expansion, essentially, or contraction. So I'll press Ctrl Z. Now if I select the face and I do the same thing, you'll see that I'm basically expanding it vertically or horizontally, right? And if I want to expand it all the way into itself, instead of selecting either the horizontal or the vertical, whichever one, I can select this little corner here. This will give me a bit more freedom, and you can see how I'm shrinking or expanding it based on this flat plane itself, right? So you might be wondering, what if I want to expand it in 3 dimensions, right? Because if you look at this, let's just say like here, I'm only expanding it in 2 dimensions right now. I'm not actually increased the height. So I'll Ctrl Z to go back. This little middle icon here, where sort of like the origin point of all your axes meet. This is essentially a three-dimensional expansion, think of it that way. So if I click on it and I drag it in, alright, you can see how it is collapsing or expanding. And if I just expand it so you can see it's expanding in all 3 dimensions now. And again, we'll use this tool a lot more in future. For now, you can see you can make some interesting shapes using these tools. Again, this is mostly practice. Have a very good understanding of what each of these editing tools do. It's a lot more useful to use them here than to put individual values themselves, especially since this is more of an artistic form of modeling. So anyway, I'll hit cancel to revert it back. And now what we do is we sculpt the earbud, and as a general rule of thumb, you want to try and keep your model or the initial shape of your form as close to the original model itself. We should technically create a quad ball, but in this case for demonstration I'm just going to use a box. And so what we'll do is I'm also going to show you how you can select things. So we selected this, but now imagine if you have lots of facets in here, right? Say I want to select this entire ring of faces here. Now you see what I've done is I've used shift and manually clicked it and rotated it. Well, that's a much simpler way. If you click on the one face, and now if you think the next one I'm going to click is this one, right? I want a ring around this face. What I can do is I can hold shift and double click, and this will automatically highlight all of those in a row. Now just note that you cannot do this if you say you want to highlight this row, this next row, right? So if I try the same, I click this and I double click this, you can see it's not actually done that. And that's because, think of it as when you're highlighting it and double clicking it while holding shift, it's going to continue the selection on either edge or whatever edges you have. So in this case, if I go back, you can see that by selecting this one, or anyone really for that matter, it's showing me that this, I've got a face next to here, so it'll continue this down this way, but I've also got an edge going this way or that way. So just take note. If you're not sure, you can always, as a beginner, just select them manually by holding shift. You can also save a bit of time. You can do the same with edges, except you don't have to hold shift, just double click, similar to how we did with sketches. And that's mostly it. If you find it's difficult, let's just say I want to paint these 4. What I can also do is I can go into the select menu here. I can select paint selection, and if you hold and drag, you can see a little box appear. Now as I drag over, you can see how it selects the face based on where I drag, like so, right? Generally, I won't recommend you use this unless you're very familiar with how to do form modeling. You can also select the priorities, so if I have to unselect. So if you've noticed, right, let's just do it again. I've selected everything. I selected the edges, the faces. I just want the faces in this case, so maybe I just want the edges. I can always select the priority here. So I can select face priority. This will give it, when I draw over the faces with the paint tool, it will only select the faces and not the edges. For now though, I'll go back to window select, and what I'll do is I'll start to actually model the earbud. So first thing I'll do is I'll double click on the middle line, make sure this is the front line. So if you look from the front, it's like so, right? Like this. So what I'll do is I'll put my view to the front. I'm going to select modify, and again you can see all my tools are here. And so what I'll do is I'll just expand this up a little bit to give it more of a curved shape. You don't have to be very exact. Generally, as a rule of thumb, you don't want to be too exact with your measurements with form modeling. I'll hit OK. And now I've got my form. Now I want to stress this because especially as a beginner, you might be very tempted to make many different changes in one single modify tool. So let's just select this one now, the XY. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to increase this out to make it a bit more of a spherical shape, right? In fact, I'm going to overextend it for this demonstration here, right? I'm going to just click out of it, say I want to watch it, whatever. Now I think, you know what, I want to expand this out as well, and I'll expand it out. Oops. Expand it out, like so, just an example, okay? And now let's just say I press escape. You can see that it's undone it, because if you don't save your modifiers, so you don't click OK, it won't really save it. So just be careful, especially if you make many changes, right? So let's just say I make this out. Oops, I selected out of it, but Oops, hang on 1 second. Let me just force it to do it. So I'll do this. I'll make this come out. I'll pull this back in, just as an example. Then I hit escape. You can see I've... Oh, interesting, they used to not do that, but as a general of thumb, it's a good habit to just hit OK after each modify move. As you get more proficient with the form modeling, then maybe you can start to not do this. But anyways, you can see here we can make some pretty interesting shapes just off the bat like this. You would never do this with a solid body. But let's just go back. So we go back to where we started with elongating this. Go back to the front, double click to make sure it's highlighted. And this time we'll do the opposite where we'll expand it out. You just want to make it a bit more spherical. So in this case, something like here. And in fact, I'll go back to this one. And I'll make this go down a little bit. And now I can see it's more spherical. So you started from a box, and now we have more of a cylinder, in a sense. So from here, we have our shape. This is starting to look a bit like our earbud, except it's a little bit too cylindrical, in fact. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start utilizing a little bit of the shortcut thing. So now that we have this cylinder, what we're going to do is we're going to select the back face. So this is now the rear, right? The back. I'm going to select the first one, any one, it doesn't matter along this row. Shift, double click. Now I've highlighted this one, and here I can just hold shift and individually select the back faces. And this way I've saved myself time and not having to individually click each and every one. You can do it that way if you're more comfortable. There's no right or wrong. And so what I want to do is I want to elongate this, and watch as I elongate, right? I'm going to hold to the right here. And as I pull this, you'll see how everything here stays the same, but the stuff on the left essentially changes, right? And that's because we are telling only these faces to move and stay the same. So think of your selection as I want this to stay the same while I make the edits to the model and move them. Again, there's really no rule book here. It's not like always do this, never do that. Play around with it. This is really experiment and practice, because there's no one way fits. Again, with all the CAD stuff, I can say select 50 millimeters, do this, do that. This is really just get as close to the shape as you can. So for now, I'm happy with this sort of shape. I can make it a bit longer if I want, depending on how deep my ear canal is. I'll hit OK. And you should have something like this. It looks a little bit almost like a bullet, right? And so from here, what we're going to do is now go back to the front here. Select the front four faces. I'm just going to hold shift click. And what I'm going to do is show you a new thing that we can do with the modify. So right now I've only got 4 faces, right? But I want to curve it in. And if you think about it, let's just try to push my thing in. You can see I'm just shrinking it back, which is not what I want. What I want to do is I want to add an additional face here so that I can use that as my curvature, right? You sort of understand what I'm doing as I show you. But in this case, I want to actually create or extrude a face or an edge. So I'm going to hold alternate. If you're on Mac, I think it's command. But I'm going to hold alternate, click and hold on this middle icon, and I'm going to drag inwards. And you can see what that's done. It's created a face for me like so, right? And now this is an additional area where I can add some curvature. In this case, let's just try. If I push this back in, you can see now it looks a little bit more like what I want. But it's still too sharp, right? I want there to be a bit more curvature still. So I'm going to go back, and what I'm going to do is do the same thing, hold alternate, very important. See the keystrokes if you are not familiar. And then hold and left click and drag it in again. So now you see I've created another face in the same one.
Every time you hit Alt, do you have to hold Alt?
Hold, always hold it.
And then
it's like a control alternate delete thing. Hold alternate, left click, and then drag it in or out depending on which way you want to go. In this case, it's in. So you should see it create the form again.
And if I let go, click and click Alt again, I'll get the secondary face.
What?
Sorry, what I meant is, so hold Alt, click, drag. Then if I release the left click and then hit Alt again, I get the second face. I can't just keep holding click. I can't hold left click down.
No, so I'll show you this example, okay? So let's just go back. I'm just going to Control Z, don't worry. I'm holding alternate right now. For those who are watching, you can see there in the keystrokes. But I'm holding alternate. I'm dragging it in. Release the left click.
Okay.
Click this again. It's giving me another face. Think of the alternate as a hotkey that you press and hold whenever you want to extrude faces or edges or whatever it is you're selecting. It depends based on what you select. In this case, I'm selecting faces. So right now I've got this shape, right? You should, if you want to count it, 1, 2, 3, right? We've created 2 additional faces from my initial 4. And so now, if I start to pull it back in, you can see I've got that curvature that I want. And of course, if I think this curvature is still too sharp, I can always then, without holding alternate, drag this in, and you can see how it shrinks my face because I'm expanding it, I'm contracting it inwards, right? So I think maybe somewhere around here is fine. They're not too big. I'll pull it back in. And right now here is my earbud. Again, pull it back somewhere there, it doesn't really matter. We're not making this functional. So I'm going to hit OK. Wait for a second. Okay. And maybe say this is still a little bit too sharp. I mean, look at this edge. It's maybe not so good. So what I'll do is I'll double click on the inner edge out here for my curvature. Because remember, this curvature is essentially, there's one edge here, and it's combining it, is putting a curve from this outer edge to the inner edge, and this line here is basically what's projecting the image, or the surface, sorry. So there's not actually an edge for my curvature. So how do I adjust it? I'll click the inner one, or I can click the outer one. It depends on the shape that you're making. And without holding alternate, I'll just contract this down. And as you can see, my curvature has been made a lot more smooth, like so. And so this is the shape I want. I've got my earbud over here. Again, if you get lost and you're watching the tutorial, please go back, look at my keystrokes, because this is really, you have to just play around with it and make sure that you understand what the tools do. So here I'm going to select the back, right? And I'm going to select the rear 4 faces, like so. I'm going to go to the drop-down menu in Modify. Alternatively, you can also still use the S shortcut and search from it. It'll give you form shortcuts. So I'll go to Modify. And what I'll do is I'll select Crease, right? And what Crease does, if you can see, is it gives us a crease, essentially. So now it looks a little bit more like a form body, right? I'm going to hit OK. And now you see that it went from a curve to a crease. So all it does is it essentially flattens almost your object. There is a separate flatten, so don't here flatten. Don't be confused by that. Think of it as the edges, right? We have this curved face here, but really what we want to do is make this like a crease, essentially, right? So when we crease these edges, you can see it's now got a very flat 90-degree perpendicular kind of angle, right? Again, these will change depending on what model you have. I'm making this, so it should be fine. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a curve to this. So what I want to do is again select the 4 faces. Go to my edit form, which is over here. And I'm going to again hold alternate, click on the middle, and drag in. And you can see how I've created a curve.
Do you think that I'm playing?
So with that, I'll just make it like so. I'll hit OK.
Knew you were alive, Woody. I knew it.
You have cancer, Andy.
And you can see it used to be flat. If I go Ctrl Z, it's flat. Now it's curved because I've added a face. Everything else stays the same though, if you notice, right? But this is now added a curve. So with this, I've got my 4 faces and a curve. Think of it almost like a fillet, if it makes sense that way. And what I'm going to do is again select my 4 faces, go back to my edit form, and I'm going to let me see. I push in. Yep. I'm going to hit alternate, and instead of using this contraction tool, whatever it is, I'm going to move my face in. And you can see it's still creating a new face, but it's keeping all that curvature that I had previously. Now I'll just go in about 5 millimeters, it doesn't matter, so long as it's not overlapping this. If you go too far, let's just say for example you go through there, this is an overlap and it's going to break fusion, so don't do that. So make sure it's not overlapping. Again, it's just visual, so it doesn't matter. I'll just pull it out here. And now with my same face still selected, you can see I've added this face here. If I again hold alternate and extrude it outwards, you can see now I've got a cylinder coming in from the inside of my earbud. And in this case, it's almost like I've extruded a cylinder from it, because remember, when I hold alternate, I'm essentially telling Fusion I want to extrude a face, an edge, a body, doesn't matter. I'm just changing the way the tools work here. So with that, I'm gonna maybe expand it out a little bit more. Like so. Just whatever feels comfortable. Here is fine. I'll hit OK. And so now I have my earbuds. And of course, again, I don't want this to be so sharp. I'm going to select, actually I'll just select the faces, it's faster. And then I'm going to modify. And again, hit alternate, hold alternate, sorry. Contract, and now I have a curve. Okay? And here we have our earbud piece. We have the casing for where we put all the electronics and the driver, the audio drivers. But now we need that little stem to sort of connect it to the wire, right? In this case, what we're going to do is we want to extrude these two out. But if I were to try that, let's just say I select these, go to edit form, and I pull these out, you can see it's going to mess up my shape. If I hold alternate to try and extrude, it's still far too big. So what can I do? I want to essentially make an additional face this way, right? If I go here and alternate and pull, it can't, because I can only extrude through faces or edges that don't have a face in the way. Remember, you can't overlap. Think of it that way. So what I can do instead is I can go, I'll hit OK. I'll cancel in this case because I already hit OK. And I'm going to go back to my modify. I'm going to select insert edge over here, and it does exactly that. So if I select insert edge and I double click to select the entire one, now I can control how far I want. And so you might be wondering, what's this? Is this millimeters? No. This is essentially a scale from 0 to 1. 0 meaning if I go to 0, it's exactly on where I started my line. 1 being the face where it was, the next closest face to it, which is here. So in this case, I don't want it to be so far. Let's just give it a 0.25. Alternatively, I can just control it by here. This might be still too small, so I'll just bring it about, let's say there. That should be fine. So I'll hit OK. And now, just like that, I've inserted my edge. Now, as a general rule of thumb in form modeling, you do not want to have too many faces if you're trying to make simple things. If you have more faces, it gives you more degrees of freedom with your sculpting, but it can also just as easily make computation a lot harder for Fusion. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go to the bottom ones here. I'm going to select modify, and instead I'm going to subdivide. So subdivision is exactly that. Think of it as you had one face, and now you can make it 2, 4, 8, 1,000 even, you know, but you wouldn't really do that. So I'm going to select the face, and you can see here now I've split this face into 4, right? And in this case, I want to go to specify, and I don't want so many. I don't want this middle face, I just want this one here, right? So I'm going to go, I think it was 1 this way. Yep, oh no, other way, sorry. So again, if you're not sure, just play around, you can see. So now you see I've got 2 faces exactly where I want them to be here. You can go simple, exact. I'll just leave it as simple for now. Hit OK. And just like that, I have my subdivided faces. And you can see the edge doesn't go elsewhere. And so this is better in my case, because now if I want to make changes, I'm not going to have to worry too much about how it might affect the rest of my model. I'm going to repeat this with the middle one, subdivide, hit OK. And now you can see I basically got the same thing as before, but without the edges, right? And now if I go here, of course, I can always go back to the edges here. Say I'm not happy with where they're positioned, I want it to be a bit further, I can always move these edges accordingly, right? As so. In this case, I'm happy with where it is. I'll select the bottom 2 faces here, hit modify. And what I want to do is I don't want to just pull it down, because you see everything follows it, right? We want to extrude this face out. So I'm going to hold alternate. I'm going to just extrude it down a little bit just to give it that sort of like nipple shaped corner. Just make it round. This is again curvature. If I just bring it back down, you see how it's a little bit, I mean, it could be very stylistic if you want, but I want to have something more realistic. So I'm going to put it down a little bit, just a little bit, to give this bump. Hold alternate again and extrude it back down, and now you can see that curvature is a lot more managed, right? In this case, I'll go to my right view to see how far I want it down. Let's just say about there. That looks reasonable. And if you look at it here, this is very curved. Again, if you want it stylistic, go for it. But I don't. So in this case, what I'll do is I'll again hold alternate. I'll select the middle one, drag it in, and you can see now it is more squared off, right? I'll just do this, hit OK. And just like that, you can see how we initially started from a simple box, right? I'll make the box again, just as a demonstration. We essentially went from something like this to this, using nothing but form sculpting and moving and the modify or edit form tools. So with this is our earbud. We've got it done. I want to just show you something quickly. So earbuds, there's not just the one piece, it's usually two. So if I undo my box, and if we go to construct plane, and I'm just going to make an offset plane here, just somewhere near here. Go back, hit OK. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the entire model, and I can do this with Windows Select. I'll click and drag, and this will select my entire model like so. I'm going to go to Modify. I'm going to go to Symmetry, and I'm going to go to Mirror Duplicate, right? I'll explain what these internal ones are in the next activity, but for now, I'll just do Mirror Duplicate. I've got my T-spline body selected, which is my earbud. I'll select the mirror plane, which is the one I made here. Hit OK. And now I'm going to hide the construction. You can see I have two earbuds. And if I want to make some changes, let's just say I want this to have a little bump out. You can see when I selected it, it's got a yellow highlight on the other. And that's because when I go to modify it, just watch this one while I do this. You can see that it also takes on the same shape. It's essentially symmetry, right? So whatever I do to this model, the other model will follow in turn. And of course, if say I want to make this earbuds, right now it's very cylindrical, I want to make it larger, I can again select the edge, go to edit form, move this back a little bit to give it more of a conical shape. You see how this moves as well? And then I can always expand this out. See? Maybe this is something more of an earbud shape like so. Hit OK. And now you can see I've got two bodies, identical, or mirrored rather, I would say, because if I were to, say, extrude this out, you can see it's on the mirror face, like so. It's mirrored. And so that can be a very easy way to essentially create two objects that are symmetrical. In this case, you want it to be symmetrical, using the form modeling tools of symmetry. So with that done, I'll hit finish form, and I want you to watch, right? So right now I've got a purple body, which means it's a form body. You can see how that isn't really like a solid internal geometry. When I hit finish form, oops, it does that. Now I have two solid bodies, and these do have internal geometry, and I'll prove that by going to section analysis. And you can see I have a solid body, right? No different than if I made it using sketches, but with very complex geometric shapes, like so, right? You could also make this using surfaces, but again, that's a lot more complicated. I find with form modeling, this is a far more intuitive and just speedier process in general. Yeah. Again, this is just practice, so you get better at it with the practice.